She had always known that life was never going to hand her anything on a silver plate. From the very beginning, she had worked hard, long hours, and had faced more doors closing in her face than most people could imagine. There were moments when she felt tired, frustrated, and even wondered if all the sacrifices were worth it. But the truth was, she had never been the type to give up. Every obstacle had become a lesson, every setback a reason to push harder. It had not been easy, but her business had grown steadily over the years, and now she was at a point where she was being recognized as one of the most influential and smart minds in her field. One morning, she arrived at her office, as she did every day, with a quiet sense of anticipation. Her assistant handed her an envelope that looked different from the usual bills and correspondence. It was heavy, almost formal, and the handwriting on the envelope suggested it was sent personally. She opened it carefully, almost with hesitation, because she had learned to expect surprises in her life. Some good, some bad. Inside, there was a beautifully printed invitation to a private party hosted by a family she had only read about in business magazines and financial news. They were a family known not only for their wealth, but also for their power and influence in multiple industries around the world. It was not every day that someone like her was invited to a gathering of such high-profile individuals. She held the invitation in her hands for a few minutes, her mind racing. Part of her felt excitement, imagining the opportunities that could come from meeting the right people. Another part of her felt cautious, remembering the stories of people being treated as outsiders, mocked, or patronized when entering spaces where they did not belong. But deep down, she knew that to grow, she could not let fear dictate her decisions. She placed the invitation on her desk and began planning carefully. This was more than a social event. It was a place where important decisions could be made, where a deal that had been in the works for months could finally take shape, a deal worth billions. The days leading up to the party were filled with preparation. She researched the family, learning about their businesses, their public image, and even the rumors about their behavior at private events. She was determined to walk in with confidence, to hold her head high, and to not let anyone's arrogance shake her. She picked out a simple but elegant outfit, one that reflected her professionalism without trying too hard to impress. She wanted to look confident, not flashy. Competent, not showy. She reviewed her notes, her presentation points, and even practiced the calm, collected way she would respond if anyone tried to belittle her. The night of the party, she arrived at the mansion, and the first thing that struck her was the sheer scale of it. The gates were massive, flanked by tall, well-dressed security guards who watched every guest carefully. As she entered, she saw luxury cars parked along the driveway, their polished bodies reflecting the bright lights set up to illuminate the entrance. A sense of awe swept over her for a moment, but she quickly reminded herself that appearances could be deceiving. She was here for a purpose. She was here because she had earned the right to be in rooms where big decisions were made, and she refused to let herself be intimidated. Inside, the mansion was even more grand. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, casting a warm glow over rooms filled with expensive art, antique furniture, and people dressed in clothing that clearly cost more than most would earn in a year. The air was filled with music from a live orchestra, the kind she had only ever seen in movies or read about in magazines. She could hear laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations in hushed tones that carried a sense of secrecy and exclusivity. The energy was different from anything she had experienced before. It was vibrant but also intimidating, a mix of celebration and quiet tension. She moved through the crowd with a smile, introducing herself politely to a few people along the way. Some nodded back politely, others barely acknowledged her presence. She was aware of the stares, the occasional whispers, the subtle glances that seemed to measure her worth, but she reminded herself that she had been in rooms like this before, and she knew how to navigate such environments. She kept her posture straight, her voice calm and her eyes focused, as if saying without words that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. Soon she noticed the family she had come to see. They were in the center of the room, laughing loudly, surrounded by their friends and associates. She could see the way they carried themselves, confident, almost arrogant, as if the entire room existed for their amusement. She felt a small pang of nervousness but quickly turned it into determination. This was not the time to be hesitant. She approached with grace, extending her hand and greeting them politely. At first they responded with the expected pleasantries, a nod here, a smile there. but she could sense an undercurrent of judgment, a silent question of whether she truly belonged among them. For a while, she engaged in light conversation, asking questions about their ventures, listening attentively and responding thoughtfully. She wanted to show that she was knowledgeable, that she had experience and insight without appearing desperate or overeager. Some of the family members seemed genuinely interested, nodding along, asking follow-up questions. Others, however, barely concealed their amusement, their expressions flickering with smirks or raised eyebrows. She noticed a few whispers and quiet laughter that seemed directed at her. Though she could not be certain, she chose to ignore them, focusing instead on maintaining her composure and presence. As the evening progressed, she realized that she was being subtly tested. The family wanted to see how she would react under pressure, how she would handle subtle mockery and veiled insults. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the unspoken challenge in their eyes. But she refused to play the part of someone intimidated. Every word she spoke was deliberate, every gesture controlled, demonstrating that she was confident in who she was and what she had achieved. She did not need validation from them to know her worth, though she was keenly aware that their recognition could impact the $5 billion deal she had been negotiating for months. There were moments when she felt a surge of anger, especially when a relative made a comment about her background in a way that was meant to belittle her achievements. She could see the surprise in some other guests' eyes, people who seemed uncomfortable with the behavior but were too polite or too afraid to intervene. She took a deep breath, choosing not to react in anger. Instead, she smiled politely, steering the conversation back to neutral ground, demonstrating both patience and control. She knew that losing her temper would only give them a sense of power they did not deserve. Despite the tension, she also allowed herself moments to enjoy the experience. She noticed the elegance of the setting, the skill of the musicians, the delicious food prepared with care. She reminded herself that she was here not only to navigate a difficult social landscape, but also to appreciate the opportunities that life had afforded her. This was a world many dreamed of entering, and even if it was filled with challenges, she had every right to stand in it. By the end of the evening, she had mingled with several influential figures, exchanged business cards, and laid the groundwork for future conversations. She had shown confidence, grace, and intelligence, and though she felt the sting of subtle mockery and condescension, she had also demonstrated resilience. As she prepared to leave, she reflected on the evening with a sense of quiet pride. She knew that the real test was not in how she had handled herself tonight, but in what she would do next. Walking out of the mansion, she felt a mix of relief and determination. The lights of the city twinkled around her, and she breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of the world settle back onto her shoulders, but in a good way. She had faced a room of the most powerful people in the world and had not been diminished by their arrogance. In fact, she felt stronger, more focused, and more resolved than ever. She knew that her next moves would be critical, that the $5 billion deal depended not only on negotiations, but on demonstrating that she would never compromise her dignity or values for money. As she drove home, she thought about the lessons of the evening. She understood that power in the business world was not just about money. It was about respect, strategy, and knowing when to stand firm. She knew that the family's behavior, though subtle, had been a test of patience, composure, and self-respect. And she had passed. More importantly, she had realized that she had the power to decide what kind of partnerships and relationships were worth pursuing. By the time she arrived home, she was already planning her next steps. She would need to address the mockery and arrogance she had witnessed, not with anger or retaliation, but with strategy and clarity. She knew that the real story was not about being invited to a party or about enduring subtle humiliation. It was about using that experience to assert her power, protect her business, and ensure that any deal she entered into was based on mutual respect, integrity, and trust. That night, as she sat in her office reviewing the events and preparing for the coming days, she felt a sense of calm confidence. She knew that this was only the beginning. The evening had given her insights, lessons, and clarity. It had shown her the type of people she wanted to work with and, more importantly, the type she did not. She felt ready for the challenges ahead, ready to turn the experience into a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. And deep down, she knew that no party, no family, no amount of mockery or subtle insult could ever define her. She had worked too hard, come too far, and earned too much respect. to let anyone else dictate her worth. The night had been a test, and she had walked through it with grace, poise, and the quiet power that came from knowing herself. As she finally left the office, turning off the lights and stepping into the quiet of her home, she allowed herself a small smile. She was ready for what came next. The invitations, the parties, the meetings, they were all just steps along the path she had chosen, a path defined by her values, her hard work, and her unwavering self-respect. And she knew with every fiber of her being that the best was yet to come. You said, write part 3 in 1,400 words without heading, in simple English words in a separate document. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. You said, write part 4 in 1,400 words without heading. In simple English words in a separate document, it should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. You said, write part 5 in 1,400 words without heading. In simple English words in a separate document. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. After the party, she did not go straight home. Instead, she drove slowly through the quiet streets, letting her thoughts settle and replaying the night over and over in her mind. The mansion, the glittering lights, the laughter, the whispers. It all felt like a blur now, but the sting of the mockery lingered. She realized that while she had handled herself well in front of the crowd, the real work was just beginning. The evening had shown her not only how the billionaire family behaved publicly, but also hinted at the attitudes and patterns she might face in private business dealings. She needed to think carefully before taking the next step. Once she arrived at her home, she poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She allowed herself a few minutes to feel frustrated, to acknowledge the anger that bubbled beneath her calm exterior during the party, but she refused to let it control her. She reminded herself that anger alone would not serve her. Strategy, clarity, and precision would. She had built her career on those qualities, and this situation was no different. Every decision she made now could affect her business and the $5 billion deal she had been negotiating for months. She began reviewing the events in detail. She thought about the comments, the jokes, the glances, and the subtle ways the family had tried to undermine her. Each action told her something important about the kind of people she was dealing with. They were clever, careful, and arrogant. They assumed their wealth and status gave them the right to belittle anyone they saw as beneath them. She understood that trying to reason with their ego in public would not work. Their behavior was a test, and she had passed it by maintaining her composure. But she knew that a more decisive move would be required to protect herself and her business. She opened her laptop and began drafting notes. She wrote down the key incidents that had occurred during the party, the individuals involved, and the underlying patterns she had observed. She listed the things that had made her uncomfortable, but she framed them not as personal grievances but as indicators of risk for any business partnership. She wanted to be methodical, precise, and unemotional in her approach. She had learned early in her career that letting emotion lead to decisions could be costly, even catastrophic. While making her notes, she began thinking about the potential consequences of different actions. She could ignore the behavior, proceed with the deal, and try to work around the family's arrogance. But she quickly dismissed that option. She knew that accepting disrespect would undermine her authority, her confidence, and her ability to lead. She could walk away entirely, but that could be interpreted as weakness if not handled carefully. The solution had to balance assertiveness with professionalism, strength with clarity. She realized she needed to confront the situation directly, but in a controlled, strategic way that left no room for misinterpretation. After hours of reflection, she formulated a plan. She would request a private meeting with the family's business advisor, someone who had influence but also could serve as a bridge for dialogue. She would make it clear that their behavior at the party was unacceptable, that respect was non-negotiable, and that she was prepared to walk away from the $5 billion deal unless there was accountability. She wanted to turn the mockery and arrogance into an opportunity, not only to protect her business but to demonstrate that she could navigate difficult, high-pressure situations with intelligence and poise. The next morning, she reached out to the advisor, carefully crafting her message. She wrote with precision, maintaining a tone of professionalism and calm authority. She did not mention the family's mockery in a confrontational way, but she clearly signaled that the behavior at the party had consequences for the deal. She requested a private meeting, specifying that it was urgent and important. Once the message was sent, she felt a sense of relief. The first step had been taken, and she had done so on her own terms, without reacting impulsively or emotionally. While waiting for a response, she continued her routine, working on other aspects of her business. She refused to allow the stress of the situation to dominate her day. She knew that patience was part of strategy. Every call she made, every email she sent was deliberate, keeping her focus sharp and her mind clear. She reminded herself that she had faced challenges before, ones that seemed insurmountable at the time and had come out stronger. This was no different. The family's arrogance was a test of her patience, her intelligence, and her strategic thinking, and she was determined to pass it with flying colors. When the advisor responded, agreeing to a meeting within the next 2 days, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had created an opening for dialogue that put her in a position of power. She was not reacting to insults. She was controlling the narrative, setting the terms for any discussion about the deal. She knew that the family would not expect her to approach the situation this way, and that gave her a significant advantage. Their arrogance could no longer manipulate her. She was the one shaping the path forward. During the meeting, she planned to remain calm but assertive. She would lay out the events of the party factually, explaining how the family's behavior could affect trust, collaboration, and mutual respect. She would emphasize that a business relationship built on anything less than respect and integrity was not sustainable. She would not be aggressive, nor would she apologize. Her message would be clear. She had power, she had options, and she was prepared to act to protect herself and her business interests. The night before the meeting, she reflected on her journey. She thought about the obstacles she had faced, the people who had doubted her, and the moments when she had been underestimated. She realized that the family's mockery at the party was just another chapter in a long story of overcoming doubt and disrespect. Every challenge had taught her resilience, every setback had taught her patience, and every insult had strengthened her confidence. She was not defined by others' arrogance. She was defined by her vision, her intelligence, and her unwavering self-respect. When the day of the meeting arrived, she dressed with care, choosing attire that was professional, simple, and commanding. She wanted her appearance to communicate confidence without arrogance. She reviewed her notes one last time, rehearsing key points, anticipating possible responses, and planning how she would maintain control no matter what was said. She reminded herself that the purpose of the meeting was not to shame or punish the family, but to assert boundaries and protect the integrity of her business. Upon arriving at the advisor's office, she was greeted politely, and the meeting began. She started by expressing appreciation for the opportunity to discuss the deal and acknowledging the advisor's role in facilitating the conversation. Then she shifted to the matter at hand, calmly explaining the events at the party. She described the mockery, the subtle insults, and the undermining behavior in a factual, precise manner. She did not exaggerate, did not dramatize. She presented the truth as it had happened. The advisor listened carefully, nodding at times and at other times taking notes. She maintained steady eye contact, her voice calm and deliberate, emphasizing the importance of respect, trust, and integrity in any partnership. She explained that a deal as significant as $5 billion required more than numbers. It required mutual respect, shared values, and confidence in one another's professionalism. Any behavior that undermined those elements would not be tolerated. As she spoke, she noticed subtle shifts in the advisor's demeanor. The initial skepticism softened, replaced by attention and perhaps a hint of understanding. She continued, outlining her expectations clearly. The behavior at the party must be acknowledged, accountability demonstrated, and future interactions handled with respect. She made it clear that she was prepared to walk away from the deal if those conditions were not met. She was not threatening. She was stating facts and setting boundaries. By the end of the meeting, the advisor was quiet, reflecting on the points she had made. He asked a few clarifying questions, but she answered with clarity and precision. She could see that her calm authority had established a new dynamic. She was no longer simply a potential business partner. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone who would not tolerate disrespect or compromise her values. The meeting concluded with an agreement that the advisor would communicate her expectations to the family and ensure that her concerns were taken seriously. Walking out of the office, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had turned a situation that could have been humiliating into an opportunity to assert her power and protect her business. She had faced arrogance, mockery, and subtle intimidation, and responded not with anger, but with intelligence, strategy, and calm authority. She realized that this was not just about a deal. It was about setting the tone for her future, ensuring that any partnership she entered into would be based on respect, integrity, and shared values. That evening, as she returned home, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood that true power was not about reacting impulsively or seeking revenge. It was about patience, strategy, and maintaining control over one's own actions and decisions. She had faced a room full of wealth, influence, and entitlement, and had emerged not diminished but stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever. She also realized that this experience had given her clarity. She could see more clearly the kind of people she wanted to work with, the kind of partnerships she wanted to build, and the standards she would never compromise. The billionaire family's behavior had revealed their character, and she now had the knowledge and insight to make informed decisions about whether a deal with them was truly in her best interest. As the night grew quiet, she sat by her window once more, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the years of hard work, the sacrifices, and the moments of doubt that had shaped her. She understood that the challenges she faced tonight were simply another step in that journey. She had learned that respect and integrity were not optional, that confidence and composure could turn mockery into strength, and that true power came from knowing one's own worth and refusing to compromise it. She went to bed that night with a sense of calm determination. The family's mockery, the subtle insults, and the tension of the evening were behind her, but the lessons remained. She was prepared for the next steps, ready to face any challenge with strategy, intelligence, and unwavering self-respect. The $5 billion deal was still on the table, but now she approached it with clarity and authority. She knew that her actions in the coming days would define not only the outcome of that deal, but also the respect, boundaries, and integrity that would guide her future business endeavors. And in that quiet, reflective moment, she felt a deep sense of pride. She had taken control of a difficult situation, maintained her dignity, and prepared for the next challenge with a clear mind and a strong heart. The night had tested her, but she had passed. She was ready for whatever came next. The day of the meeting arrived, and she felt a quiet sense of resolve as she prepared herself. She knew this was the moment that would define the next steps of the $5 billion deal, and perhaps even set the tone for her future relationships with powerful partners. Her mind was sharp, her strategy clear. She dressed with purpose, choosing an outfit that projected confidence and professionalism without appearing flashy. Her hair, her makeup, every detail was carefully considered, not for them but for herself, to reinforce her own sense of authority and self-assurance. As she entered the private meeting room, she was greeted by the family's business advisor, who offered a polite, measured smile. The room itself was sleek, with glass walls, minimalist furniture, and a view of the city skyline. It was a different environment than the mansion, quieter, more controlled, yet the undercurrent of power and wealth was unmistakable. She could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of curiosity and calculation. She understood that this meeting was more than a conversation. It was a test, a moment to assert her value and her expectations without faltering. The advisor invited her to sit, and she did, maintaining perfect posture and calm composure. She began by thanking him for taking the time to meet and acknowledging his role in facilitating the deal. Her tone was warm but firm, friendly yet unyielding. She wanted to establish immediately that she was here to conduct business on her terms, not to engage in endless politeness or excuses. Once the initial pleasantries were complete, she shifted the conversation to the events of the party. She described the mockery and subtle insults carefully. Sticking to the facts and avoiding emotion-driven language, she mentioned how certain comments had been made about her background, her business, and even her appearance, all intended to belittle and undermine her in front of other guests. Her voice was calm even, with no trace of anger, but her words carried weight. Each statement was deliberate, precise, and impossible to dismiss. She wanted the advisor to understand the seriousness of the behavior and its implications for any future partnership. The advisor listened attentively, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally pausing to consider her points. She could see subtle signs that her words were landing, that he understood the consequences of ignoring them. She continued, explaining that respect, trust, and integrity were fundamental to her approach in business. A deal as significant as $5 billion could not succeed if those principles were compromised. She emphasized that her goal was not to punish the family, but to ensure that any partnership moving forward would be built on mutual understanding and professionalism. Her strategy was clear. She was not attacking the family personally. She was asserting her expectations as a business partner. She made it known that she had options, that she was willing and capable of walking away from the deal if necessary. She spoke with authority, demonstrating that she was not merely reacting to the mockery but proactively protecting her interests. This was the moment to shift the power dynamic, to make it clear that she would not be intimidated by wealth, status, or arrogance. The advisor, after a moment of reflection, asked a few questions to clarify her concerns. She answered each calmly and thoroughly, reinforcing her points with logic and evidence. She cited past experiences, successes, and the deliberate steps she had taken to establish credibility in her field. She was articulate without being confrontational, confident without being aggressive. Every word, every gesture, every pause was carefully measured to maintain control of the conversation. As the discussion progressed, she noticed subtle changes in the advisor's demeanor. The initial skepticism softened into respect, and she realized that her calm authority had altered the dynamic of the room. The advisor was no longer evaluating her as a negotiable partner. He was recognizing her as a professional who could not be underestimated. She had shifted from being a potential target of mockery to a figure commanding serious attention. After discussing the events of the party and her expectations, she moved to the heart of the matter, the $5 billion deal. She outlined her vision for the partnership, emphasizing the importance of clear communication, mutual respect, and shared values. She was specific about her requirements, detailing the actions and assurances that would need to take place for the deal to move forward. She did not issue ultimatums in anger, but she was clear that the deal would only continue under terms that aligned with her standards. The advisor listened carefully, occasionally interjecting with questions or comments. She responded with clarity, maintaining control of the conversation. She could see that he was beginning to understand that her expectations were reasonable, professional, and non-negotiable. They were not demands born of ego, but boundaries rooted in experience and self-respect. This realization shifted the meeting from a potential confrontation to a negotiation framed on respect and logic. She also remained aware of the advisor's reactions to her tone, body language, and word choice. She maintained eye contact, leaned slightly forward to convey engagement, and used pauses strategically to emphasize key points. Every gesture reinforced her credibility and authority, demonstrating that she was both composed and fully in control of the situation. She understood that presence was as important as words in establishing power in a room dominated by influence and wealth. After she had outlined her expectations and requirements, the advisor paused. He acknowledged that he understood the concerns and promised to communicate them to the family. He assured her that her points would be taken seriously, and that the behavior she experienced at the party would not be ignored. She could sense a subtle tension in his voice, perhaps an acknowledgement that she had established herself as a formidable partner who would not tolerate disrespect. She nodded politely, maintaining her calm composure, signaling that the discussion was productive and that she had achieved her objective without aggression or confrontation. As the meeting came to a close, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had turned what could have been a humiliating situation into an opportunity to assert her authority, protect her business interests, and demonstrate the value of her partnership on her terms. She had faced arrogance, mockery, and subtle intimidation with clarity, intelligence, and calm authority. The outcome of the meeting was a testament to her strategic thinking and ability to navigate high-pressure situations with poise. Walking out of the office, she reflected on the meeting and the lessons it had provided. She understood that wealth and power do not always equate to respect, but respect and integrity are far more valuable in business than status or money. She realized that the family's mockery at the party had been a test of patience, composure, and strategic thinking, and she had passed it. More importantly, she had turned the situation into an advantage, positioning herself as someone who could not be underestimated. She also thought about the implications for the deal itself. She knew that while the advisor had agreed to communicate her concerns, the family's reaction would determine the next phase. She was prepared for resistance, for denial, or for excuses, but she was also confident that her approach had set a clear boundary. Any further disrespect would have consequences. She had made it clear that the deal was contingent on professionalism and accountability, and she was ready to act if necessary. That evening, she returned home and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of hard work, the obstacles, the moments of doubt, and the countless instances where she had been underestimated. She realized that the events of the past few days were simply another chapter in that journey, another test of her resilience and strategic thinking. She felt a sense of pride in how she had handled the situation, knowing that she had not allowed herself to be diminished by arrogance or mockery. She also allowed herself to consider the power of her own presence and authority. She understood that true strength in business comes not from reacting impulsively, but from maintaining control, making strategic decisions, and asserting one's values. She had demonstrated all of these qualities in the meeting, and she felt confident that the family, through their advisor, now understood that she was not someone to be dismissed or underestimated. Throughout the night, she reflected on the next steps. She knew that she would need to remain vigilant, monitoring the family's response and ensuring that her conditions were met. She also began planning for contingencies, preparing for the possibility that the family might resist or attempt to manipulate the situation. She was determined to protect her business, her reputation, and her values no matter the obstacles. As she prepared for bed, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced a high-stakes situation, navigated it with intelligence and calm authority, and emerged stronger and more confident. The events of the party and the subsequent meeting had tested her patience, her composure, and her strategic thinking. She had passed those tests and, in doing so, had reinforced her own sense of self-worth and authority. She knew that the days ahead would bring further challenges, but she also knew that she was ready. She had the experience, the insight, and the confidence to handle whatever came next. The $5 billion deal was still in play, but it would only continue under terms that aligned with her values and expectations. She had demonstrated that she was not only capable of managing complex business negotiations, but also of navigating personal dynamics and asserting her authority in the face of arrogance and mockery. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had taken control of a situation that could have been humiliating, turned it into an opportunity to assert her power, and positioned herself for success. The billionaire family's behavior had revealed their character, but she had demonstrated hers. She was strong, strategic, and unyielding in her values. The night had been a turning point, a moment of empowerment, and a clear statement that she would not compromise her dignity or her standards for anyone, no matter how wealthy or influential. And in that quiet, reflective moment, she knew with certainty that the next phase of the story, whether it ended in collaboration, confrontation, or complete separation, would be faced with the same intelligence, poise, and unwavering self-respect that had carried her through every challenge before. The days that followed the meeting were filled with anticipation. She spent her time focusing on her other projects, ensuring her business continued to thrive, but her mind never strayed far from the billionaire family and the $5 billion deal. Every message from their office, every call, every subtle signal from advisors was carefully considered. She knew that patience was critical. The family's reaction would reveal much about their character and whether they truly understood the consequences of their behavior. News from the advisor came slowly at first, vague reassurances that her concerns had been noted and that the family would review their approach. She read between the lines, knowing that words could be carefully crafted to pacify without promising change. She remained calm, taking nothing for granted. This was not the moment to act hastily. She had learned from experience that in high-stakes business, timing and strategy often determined outcomes as much as talent or effort. Then came a turning point. The advisor called, expressing concern about the public perception of the family after whispers about the party had reached social circles. Apparently, several attendees had spoken about the behavior they had witnessed, and it was creating quiet but significant pressure. The family's reputation, built over decades, was at risk. The advisor emphasized that they were now fully aware of how their actions could jeopardize the deal and their standing in the broader business community. She listened carefully, acknowledging the information without showing triumph. Her focus remained on the practical implications: respect, accountability, and the security of her business interests. With this new development, she knew it was time to assert her next move. She had already demonstrated composure and intelligence. Now it was about translating that into action that would safeguard her position and values. She drafted a formal communication to the family, written in clear, professional language. She expressed her gratitude for their initial interest, but made it unequivocally clear that their behavior at the party was unacceptable. She emphasized that respect and integrity were non-negotiable, and that moving forward would require concrete changes in behavior and attitude. Sending that message was an act of empowerment. She felt no fear, no hesitation. She was taking control of a situation that had once felt intimidating, and now the power dynamic had shifted. The billionaire family, accustomed to receiving deference and compliance, was being asked to account for their behavior. This was not retaliation. It was a necessary step to ensure that any collaboration occurred on equitable terms. She knew that her actions were setting a precedent, not only for this deal but for how she would navigate future high-pressure negotiations. As the hours turned into days, responses came from various channels. The family initially reacted with disbelief and defensiveness as expected. They did not immediately acknowledge the depth of their misstep, attempting to downplay the significance of their behavior. But she remained unwavering. She responded with calm, factual reminders of the importance of respect and the potential consequences for the deal. She refused to engage in emotional debates or be drawn into excuses. Her clarity and precision reinforced her authority and demonstrated that she would not compromise her principles for the sake of convenience or wealth. Meanwhile, the story began to circulate quietly in business circles. A few media outlets picked up on hints of tension around the deal, and discussions about professionalism, respect, and corporate behavior started to emerge. While she never sought publicity, she recognized that the attention could work to her advantage. It highlighted not only the behavior of the billionaire family, but also her response, measured, strategic, and unwavering. In a world where power and wealth often overshadow integrity, her approach stood out as a model of professionalism and self-respect. Within a week, the family finally reached out, acknowledging the concerns she had raised. They offered formal apologies and assurances that the behavior at the party would not be repeated. The tone was cautious, as if they were testing her response, but she remained firm. She evaluated their words carefully, ensuring that the promises were credible and actionable. She emphasized that trust would need to be rebuilt gradually, and that any future negotiations would depend entirely on consistent, respectful behavior. At this stage, she faced a critical decision: whether to continue with the original deal or explore alternative opportunities. She recognized that while the family's apology was a step forward, she could no longer rely solely on promises. Her values demanded that she act cautiously, protecting her business and reputation. She began exploring other potential partners, companies that aligned with her principles and demonstrated professionalism, respect, and integrity. She knew that a $5 billion deal could be found elsewhere, and she was determined to ensure that any partnership was equitable and sustainable. Within days, an alternative opportunity emerged, an offer from a global corporation with a strong reputation for ethics and collaboration. They were aware of her accomplishments and treated her with the respect and seriousness she expected. The terms were not only comparable to the original deal, but offered greater strategic alignment and flexibility. She reviewed the proposal carefully, consulting with her team, and realized that this was a better fit for her vision and her values. The decision became clear: The original deal, tainted by mockery and arrogance, would be replaced with a partnership founded on mutual respect. When she communicated her decision to the family, the response was one of shock and, to some extent, disbelief. They had assumed that their wealth and influence would secure the deal regardless of behavior. They did not anticipate that someone could walk away from billions with such confidence and composure. She delivered her message politely but firmly, explaining that respect, accountability, and alignment with her values were the ultimate determinants of any partnership. She made no apologies, no concessions, and no attempts to soften the impact. The deal was canceled, and she had acted decisively, fully aware of the implications. The aftermath was significant. In the business world, her decision became a talking point, a demonstration that even the wealthiest and most powerful individuals must respect professionalism and integrity. The billionaire family faced quiet scrutiny from peers and media alike, with discussions about their behavior circulating in elite circles. Meanwhile, her reputation was strengthened, not only for her business acumen but also for her unwavering commitment to principles. She had turned a situation that could have been humiliating into an opportunity to assert power, control, and self-respect. In the weeks that followed, she focused on the new partnership, building relationships, negotiating terms, and ensuring that the collaboration would be successful and sustainable. The project grew quickly, fueled by mutual respect, shared goals, and a foundation of trust. She found that the process was far smoother than the previous negotiations had been, not because the numbers were different, but because the people involved treated her as an equal and valued her expertise. The contrast was stark and satisfying, a validation of her decision to prioritize values over immediate financial gain. As she reflected on the entire experience, she understood the deeper lessons it had taught her. Wealth and power do not guarantee respect or integrity. Confidence, composure, and clear boundaries are essential in navigating high-stakes situations. Challenges and mockery, when met with strategic calm and self-respect, can be transformed into opportunities for empowerment. She realized that her journey was not just about financial success, but about asserting her authority, protecting her values, and demonstrating that dignity and intelligence are as powerful as money. She also thought about the personal growth that had come from the ordeal. The party, the mockery, the meeting, and the eventual cancellation of the deal had tested her patience, resilience, and strategic thinking. She had faced a room full of wealth and entitlement and emerged stronger, more focused, and more confident. She had learned that true power is not measured by reaction or retaliation, but by control, foresight, and the courage to act decisively when necessary. In the quiet moments of reflection, she allowed herself a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had navigated one of the most challenging experiences of her career without compromising her principles. She had faced mockery, subtle intimidation, and arrogance, and had responded not with anger or submission, but with strategy, composure, and intelligence. Her actions had protected her business, her reputation, and her self-respect, and had demonstrated that integrity and professionalism are non-negotiable. Her success was not only financial but deeply personal. She had reaffirmed her own values, strengthened her confidence, and demonstrated that true authority comes from knowledge, self-awareness, and unwavering principles. She had turned a moment that could have been humiliating into a story of triumph, empowerment, and strategic mastery. As the months went on, the alternative deal flourished. Projects launched on schedule, relationships with partners strengthened, and her influence continued to grow. She reflected on the lessons she had learned, knowing that this experience would inform her approach to all future negotiations and interactions. The billionaire family faded into the background of her story, a reminder of what she would not tolerate, while the new partnership became a symbol of respect, alignment, and shared success. In the end, she understood that victory was not about wealth or status alone. It was about clarity, composure, and courage. It was about knowing her worth and refusing to compromise it, no matter the pressure. She had turned mockery and arrogance into an opportunity for empowerment, demonstrating that dignity, intelligence, and strategic thinking are among the most powerful tools in business and in life. Sitting in her office one evening, watching the sun set over the city skyline, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, the challenges significant, but the outcome validated her approach. She had not only protected her business interests, but had also reinforced the principles that guided her life. The experience had shown her that respect is earned, not demanded, and that true success comes from integrity, strategy, and unwavering self-belief.